that I was shocked. I was completely and utterly shocked. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Hayley and I'm a first time mum to a little baby boy called Oliver, who is currently 7 months old. Now here on my channel, I share everything that I wished I knew with you as a first time mum, and at the end of every video I share what I would have done differently. Now as always, if you haven't already, make sure you press that subscribe button so that I can continue to grow this amazing community. But for now, let's get started. So guys, today I'm going to be talking about the 4th trimester, and if I'm completely honest, one of the reasons I wanted to start this YouTube channel was to talk about and get some awareness out there about the 4th trimester. Now, this might sound a little bit crazy to some people, but I didn't even know there was a 4th trimester. I had heard the word postpartum thrown around everywhere, but I didn't actually know there was officially a 4th trimester. And it came as a huge shock to me, a huge surprise. I was not prepared for what it had in store for me at all. And if you have seen my birth story video, then you'll know that there's quite a lot that happened that I'm going to talk about today that I touched upon in that video. But I just wanted to say that when it comes to kind of postpartum and the 4th trimester, there are so many videos out there that show this big, glowing, you know, amazing experience, and I just want to put out there that not everyone has that experience, including me, which is why I'm talking about it today. And you know, it's actually more uncommon for that to be the experience that mums have. Generally it's kind of not the all singing, all dancing pictures, videos that you see on Instagram and TikTok, and you know, for some mums it may be, but generally to other mums that I've spoken to, that's not the case. So if you are feeling like that, don't feel like you're alone, because a lot of us don't experience that till later on down the line, normally once you're through the 4th trimester. And I just want to say as well, this video isn't to scaremonger people that are going into the 4th trimester, it's just to give some awareness, because I just don't think there is enough. And I think a lot of us mums go into the 4th trimester having this vision and not really having an understanding of what it could be like or what to expect. So the 4th trimester is the 12 weeks preceding the birth of your baby. So people now call it the newborn stage, but it is ultimately the 4th trimester. And again, I didn't even know there was a 4th trimester till I was in it. And that to me in itself is quite scary. So I was very fortunate that my pregnancy had gone really well. My birth had pretty much gone how I wanted. And then all of a sudden, I felt like that whole experience was just snapped away from me. And the reason being, throughout my whole labour, I had the same midwife until he was born. Once he was born, literally about 5 minutes after, maybe 10 maximum that he was born, my midwife finished her shift and a new one came in. And that was the start of a very difficult and challenging trimester. I ended up having a 2nd degree tear, which is very normal. It's very normal in pregnancies to have a tear or 2 tear. But what happened was it wasn't dealt with in the correct way. And it actually meant that I was bedridden for 2 weeks after having Oliver. I did not envision that for myself. And also I thought that I was going to be having this amazing experience where I could, you know, hold my baby, cuddle my baby, bond with my baby, breastfeed my baby, and that wasn't the case, because as soon as he was born and I had my stitches for my 2nd degree tear, I was bedridden. I was on extremely strong painkillers to try and alleviate the pain. And that meant that I couldn't breastfeed because I just wasn't in any state of mind to focus on anything else but what was going on down there. And so for the first 2 weeks of Oliver's life, Mike actually pretty much looked after him, did everything with him, that I missed out on the bathing, the feeding, the bonding. I was so dosed up on painkillers that I was scared to hold him in case I might drop him, in case I might fall asleep. Just all of these fears then started to creep in, and I didn't hold him from the moment I left the hospital. And when I was in the hospital, I did skin to skin initially when he was first born. And then once we were put onto a ward, I held him once then. But after that, I didn't hold him again for over 2 weeks. And another thing I wanted to touch up on was that we were taken from obviously the labour room into a ward, and I was on the ward for 23 hours, and they wanted to make sure that Oliver could feed properly before they let us go home, which is completely understandable. And I remember I couldn't even get out of the wheelchair. They had to wheelchair me from the labour room to the ward, then wheelchaired onto the ward, and I don't really remember much from that moment on. And we stayed at the hospital for 23 hours, and then we were discharged because they were happy that Oliver was feeding. And at the time, I probably should have said, well, what about me? I was so just overwhelmed and tired and exhausted. I didn't even think to question it. And we got Oliver home. I remember giving him his first feed, and I've never heard a scream like it. And I remember saying to Mike, I don't know what to do. What do we do? And I was this close to phoning 999 because the pain he was in was just excruciating. And I didn't know what to do. And thankfully, we'd had an amazing nurse looking after us on the ward. And she gave us some contact details when we left and said, if you need anything, call this number. And we called this number, and guess what? We had to take Oliver straight back into hospital. And so after 3 hours of leaving the hospital, we were back there again with him. And it turned out that he has colic and reflux. And the colic was causing significant wind. So he was in a lot of pain for a significant amount of time until the doctors actually picked it up around about 6 weeks after he was born. And so that added massive strain onto the 4th trimester. So once we'd got through that, we got through the first week, and then the second week, Mike's parents came down because they live up north to stay with us. And I remember feeling like the worst mum in the world because I wasn't holding my baby. I was in bed, and I was conscious that they were thinking that I was just being lazy and that I didn't want to do anything. And I remember feeling so alone in that moment because I was watching everyone bond with my baby and be with my baby, and I was in bed in excruciating pain, and I just felt like this bond was growing further and further away from my baby. And I just remember feeling so alone in that moment. Just remembering the pain that I was in was the only thing that I could focus on in that moment. And so here we were, second week of Oliver being born. And I'd gone through 2 weeks of horrendous pain. And I remember going to see the midwife and her saying to me, you can't carry on like this. You can't. You need to have your stitches out. So then I had to go back to the hospital and have my stitches taken out. And to be fair, within a couple of days, probably 2 to 3 days, it did clear up and I was able to walk again. But normally stitches should heal within 3 to 5 days, and this had been over 2 weeks. 2 weeks I'd endured this pain. And I did feel a bit better after that. But what I would say is, in those moments of those first 2 weeks, I'd never felt anything so physically and emotionally and mentally challenging. And I don't think it would have been so hard if I'd known that I would have had a longer recovery time than I would have expected to, and that there would have been certain implications of that, i.e. not being able to bond as much as I would have liked with my baby. And I suppose it's very similar to those who have, you know, an unplanned cesarean or C-section. You know, they probably have a different idea of how their birth is going to be, and here they are now having to recover longer than they'd anticipated. And so I think that's why it was so hard for me, because I just hadn't mentally prepared myself for what that meant and what the implications were going to be, because I had to now consider what the next few weeks were going to be like, and they were far from what I had envisioned for me and the bonding with my baby. I just want to touch on that note as well, that I was shocked. I was completely and utterly shocked at the lack of support that you get once you leave that hospital. And in the weeks preceding the discharging of the hospital, we had one visit from the health visitor, and they always apparently ask the question if you've had any issues in terms of mental health, how you're feeling mentally, etc, etc. And I have suffered and still do suffer with anxiety. And she said to me, okay, how have you been feeling? And the thing is, I didn't have baby blues. I genuinely didn't have baby blues. So baby blues happen kind of within 10 to 14 days after having your baby. But I genuinely didn't have baby blues, because all I wanted to do was be with him and hold him and be well. That's all I wanted. I didn't have baby blues, but I have previously suffered with anxiety, and obviously that had pretty much skyrocketed going through everything I'd been through. And so she said to me that someone would contact me. No one ever contacted me. And I didn't see another health visitor for months later. And I genuinely thought that we would be in constant contact, and it just wasn't the case. I don't know if that was just me, but from what I've heard, there is just a very minimal amount of support for parents and mums when they leave the hospital. Once you've left the hospital, you're kind of left to your own devices. That's how I felt. And so I'll come on to later what I would do differently. And I genuinely feel, even to this day, a lot of sadness towards my 4th trimester, because I can never get those moments back. I can never get that time back, and I can't change what's happened. And I try very hard not to think about it too much, because it does get me incredibly upset. And to think that my first experience with my first baby was pretty much non-existent for the first 2 weeks of his life, and the mum guilt that I feel knowing that I wasn't as present, and it wasn't for the want of trying, but I physically wasn't able to be there for him in the way that I wanted to. And that to me is devastating, but it will forever be in my memory that that's how I remember the beginning of my 4th trimester. I just want to start off by saying that even though I went through that experience, I wholeheartedly want another baby, and it has not put me off whatsoever of having another baby. And I now have the strongest bond with my little baby boy. I can't even tell you. So if you feel that you're not bonding as much as you thought you would with your little one, trust me, it will happen. It will come. There is nothing like a mummy baby bond. It will happen. It just, for some of us, like me, it takes time. And even though, like I said, I had that experience, it doesn't change the rest of my journey, and it doesn't change the incredible relationship I now have with my little baby boy. It just takes time. So just give yourself time. What I would say is, to anyone that is going into the 4th trimester, just be prepared. Just be prepared. Look into it. Do research on it. I do feel like that, as I said, was the hardest trimester for me, and it's one that I think is probably the most important, because here you are with, especially if it's your first baby, this little person that you are now solely responsible for, that you need to look after and take care of, and yet it might be how you planned, but you might not feel how you thought you might feel, or it might not be exactly how you envisioned it, and that's okay. Like, genuinely, that is okay. I think for the majority of people, it's not what they thought it would be, and that's why I wanted to do this video and raise the awareness, and to help anybody else that is going through the 4th trimester and felt in a similar way, or is having similar feelings. Like, you're not alone. Instagram, TikTok, all of these places showcase the best. They don't showcase the worst. And you'd be surprised at how many people probably feel exactly the same as you do right now. As you'll know, if you've seen some of my previous videos, I will now talk about what I would have done differently. And my goodness me, there's a lot I would have done differently. The first one being, I would not have left that hospital without feeling like I knew that Oliver was going to be okay and that I was going to be okay. And I would have 100% stayed in for at least one more full day / night before leaving the hospital. If for whatever reason you think that something's not right, trust that mum instinct, trust that feeling inside of you, whether that's you, your baby, or your babies if you're having more than one. Just trust that gut instinct, that mama instinct, and do not leave that hospital until you can look after your baby and that your baby is okay. Now, there is obviously going to be a time that you're going to have to leave the hospital, but what I would say is, if you are unwell, like I was unwell, or if your baby doesn't seem completely ready to leave, then voice your concerns, speak to them, and let them know how you're feeling. Don't keep it bottled up like I did. I know I probably wasn't in the right frame of mind to have that conversation at the time, because I didn't really know what was going to happen if I didn't. But looking back now, I would 100% have had another conversation and explained my worries, explained my concerns, and then made a decision as to whether I left the hospital, not just left the hospital because that's the time that they'd said we could be discharged. Oh, that reminds me, actually, I had those, I can't think what they're called, but they're like the netted knickers, like the disposable knickers basically. They were a godsend. They were a godsend. So if you haven't got any of those, get some of those. I would get more. That's one thing I would do differently. But I didn't even use half of my hospital bag. I had this, you know, again, thought that I was going to have this amazing shower after I had my baby, and I was going to use all of these amazing products. I was absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. No. That's just not how it was for me. So again, just be prepared that you might not necessarily use everything in your hospital bag. So just take the basics. Don't take everything. Just take the basics. Third thing, if you're not feeling yourself, tell someone, talk to someone, let someone know how you're feeling. Do not keep it bottled up, and don't feel like you have to do everything all of the time. If, like me, you aren't able to, you're not able to, take the pressure off yourself. I still felt like I should be doing everything with the baby. I should be doing everything as a wife. I should be a host because people were coming over, and no, absolutely not. You need to rest, and that's what I would tell myself. Rest. Make sure you rest, and make sure, number 4, that you are having people round when you are ready. Do not feel forced to have people come around and see your baby if you are not ready, because that is going to add so much more stress. Your body's just gone through a massive trauma. Even if you have the most simplistic, birth and the most simplistic recovery of your birth, you are still going to be exhausted. You are still going to be adjusting to having a new person in your house and finding your feet and finding your way. So don't feel pressured into having people over if you don't feel comfortable having them over. Take your time. That is the biggest piece of advice I could give. Take your time to rest. Take your time to bond. Take your time to get used to your new way of life. Do not succumb to the pressure that is given to you as a new mum and as a new parent, because trust me, that is such a small amount of time you get with your baby. So just make sure you're using it in a way that you want to use it and that is most comfortable for you. Don't feel like you should be doing everything for everyone else. And the final thing I would do differently is to find out exactly who I speak to if I need something specific, because once we've gone back into the hospital again after being discharged for Oliver, they gave me a piece of paper with so many numbers on it, and it gave me a sense of relief when I got home, because I knew there was someone I could contact any time of day. I knew there was someone I could contact, that I knew there was someone I could speak to, and it just helped ease my anxiety so much. So my biggest piece of advice would be, once you are going to leave that hospital, speak to your nurse or a midwife and say to them, if there are any issues or if I need to speak to someone, who can I contact? When can I contact them? And honestly, it will give you the biggest sense of relief, but also the peace of mind that you're not alone, because that was one of the biggest things I felt when, I was going through what I was going through, is I felt like I was on my own. You're not. There is support out there. Unfortunately, you just kind of have to get the information yourself. That's the only difference. So guys, that brings me to the end of my 4th trimester video. I hope you have enjoyed it, but most of all, I hope it's given you some comfort and has helped in some way, because that's what I'm trying to do with this video. I just want to raise awareness and help as many mums as I can who are either going to enter into the 4th trimester or are currently in the 4th trimester and are feeling very similar to how I felt. Now, don't forget that you can always comment below. Let me know how your 4th trimester was. Let me know how you're feeling if you're currently in the 4th trimester. And don't forget to press that subscribe button so that I can continue to share what I wish I knew with you as a first-time mum and build this amazing community. As always, you can grab me over on Instagram and on TikTok. But until then, I will see you next week, and I hope you have the most amazing day. Take care. Bye.